To hear the right tell it, the only story that you should care about is Hunter Biden, the president's son, who has absolutely no role in government. For months, they've used their House majority to relentlessly investigate him. Now, what they've credibly revealed is that public figures and their children trade on their name for access. Shocker. Jared and Ivanka did it, Roger Clinton did it, and so did Hunter Biden. However, that Republican fixation has only resulted in two tangible things: Donald Trump's first impeachment and launching a 2018 Trump Justice Department investigation into Hunter Biden. The man in charge of that investigation, David Weiss, has been looking into whether Hunter Biden properly paid his taxes in 2017 and 2018. They were specifically focused on a federal form Hunter Biden filled out when purchasing a gun in 2018. He lied on the form when he claimed that he was not a drug user. He later admitted that he was. Now, to be crystal clear, the special counsel is not investigating the president of the United States. He's investigating his son. But that hasn't stopped Republicans from accusing Hunter Biden of running a corrupt business enterprise flush with foreign cash that also benefited his father. Again, there's nothing inherently illegal about accepting money from foreign interests if you're a private citizen, even if your parent is a famous politician. You do, however, have to pay your taxes on it, which Hunter Biden is accused of not doing. Last month, Hunter Biden and his lawyers agreed to a plea deal for failing to pay taxes and illegal gun possession. But that deal fell apart after a Trump-nominated federal judge refused to accept it. Earlier today, Attorney General Merrick Garland, who's been accused by the right of running a two-tier justice system that only prosecutes conservatives, announced that he was appointing David Weiss special counsel in the Hunter Biden probe. According to Garland, Weiss asked to be appointed to the position and told him that, in his judgment, his investigation has reached a stage at which he should continue his work as a special counsel. So there we are. Mary McCord is back with me. And Mary, I have a couple of questions. Question number one. Since when are special counsels appointed for private citizens? Because I just want to read you this. Devon Archer, who's on the board of the Ukrainian company Burisma Holdings, which only people who watch Fox understand what that is. That was the company that Hunter Biden was on the board of as well. When Joe Biden was vice president, he testified in front of the committee that wanted to take down Joe Biden, that he's not aware of any wrongdoing by Joe Biden, that he never heard of a $5 million transfer of any transfer to Joe Biden, and that the Ukrainian prosecutor who was fired was not viewed as a threat by the company, and that Hunter Biden was selling the illusion of access to his father, but never sold access to his father. Ergo, Joe Biden is not involved in any of this, nor did he buy an illegal gun, nor was he using drugs. Why is a special counsel investigating Hunter Biden?
Well, the special counsel regulations provide that the attorney general may appoint a special counsel when he concludes that it would be in the public interest. And that's exactly what Merrick Garland did here. And he did it, I think, also because David Weiss asked him to do it. And I think he concluded that because for the same reasons that he had said even before appointing David Weiss as a special counsel, he'd made it clear, Mr. Weiss had made it clear that Mr. Weiss had the ability and authority to operate pretty independently of the Department of Justice, because I think Mr. Garland recognizes the sensitive nature of investigating the son of a president. You're right. He's a private citizen. It's about conduct he took in his private capacity, although there are certainly allegations that he tried to capitalize on his father's position in government to help him win these contracts. That's certainly something that's being discussed and alleged. And so I think this is really one where the attorney general said it's in the public interest, because we do not want to have any appearance of favoritism toward the president's son. Excuse me. And until this week, Mr. Weiss had never asked for it. But when Mr. Weiss did ask for it, it really would have been untenable, I think, at that point for the attorney general to say no, because imagine what would have happened if he had said no. People on the Hill are hollering right now about appointing David Weiss. Somebody weeks ago, they said should be appointed. Imagine how they would holler if the attorney general said, no, I'm not going to appoint him.
So, I mean, in other words, he's being treated differently because he's Joe Biden's son. I want to read this little piece here. The particular gun charge that the feds brought against Joe Biden, this is from the Daily Beast, a drug user in possession of a firearm, is rarely brought as a standalone crime, especially now that roughly a fifth of the country uses cannabis, with an inevitably significant overlap with the nation's estimated 80 million gun owners. There's more than that, I think. When the feds do bring this type of case, they come down hard, but it's usually a tool they use to take down tough-to-arrest criminals, like militant white nationalists, Islamist terrorists, or narco traffickers. I think all the evidence that I've seen so far in this case is that Hunter Biden, he could be a terrible guy, I don't know, never met him, is being treated worse than anyone else would be. he's being treated worse the way Donald Trump claims he's being treated worse, but he actually is. Because normally this would just be misdemeanor stuff that would be done with. Instead, he's endlessly investigated because of politics. That's my perception.
Well,
what's yours?
Yeah, well, I think with respect to the gun charge, which I don't expect that we'll see again, because we now have a ruling from one of the circuits that that particular offense violates the Second Amendment after the Supreme Court's ruling last year in a different case, a Second Amendment case. So I don't think we're going to see that reappear. But to your point, you know, that charge was part of a negotiated plea agreement. And so, you know, there's lots of factors that go into that. There's a give and take from both sides. It was something that was subject to a diversion agreement, which means if he complies with certain requirements for the period of 2 years, I think it was 2 years in that agreement, there would be no charge. So, you know, I'm not going to say that I think he was treated totally differently because of that. I will say, though, that the very fact that David Weiss was still even the prosecutor, forget the special counsel appointment today, even before that, he was a holdover Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. Normally, all of the president's U.S. attorneys resign on January 20th when a new administration comes in. So already there was some special treatment here or different treatment here, and it was all, I think, for political purposes. So it would not appear that the Department of Justice was going to replace, you know, a Republican-appointed prosecutor who's investigating the president's son. So politics are definitely a part of this, but that's, I think, why the Attorney General said it's in the public interest to do this.
Make him Hunter Joe Schlabotnik. He ain't even getting prosecuted. He's doing a diversion program and going home. That's just my opinion. Mary McCord, thank you for staying extra overtime.